Hey everyone, thank you so much for being here. Before we kick off this week's episode, just a quick ask. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell to make sure that you never miss an episode, never miss out on any of the strategies and tactics that we're sharing to help you continue charting your own path to freedom. And if you'd like to go deeper with any of this, we've launched a free Facebook group, which you can join at pathtofreedom.com/group. And we've linked that in the show notes to make it easy for you to find. All right. Thank you again for being here. Let's drop in to the episode. Hey, what's up, everyone? And welcome back to the Path to Freedom podcast. Today, I'm kicking off a new series that I'm going to be putting out from time to time where I address different misconceptions around franchising. And there's a lot of them out there. And, you know, as I spend all of my time all day, every day, talking to people that are curious about franchise ownership, you know, wanting to explore different franchise opportunities. And if you know anything about my background, I've worked for several national franchisors. My wife and I invest in franchise businesses ourselves as franchisees. We own franchises. We've sold franchises. So, you know, my professional life is all kind of centered around franchising. And, you know, I realize that sometimes things I take for granted in terms of my understanding of the world of franchising are not a given for other people that haven't spent all this time learning about franchising. So that's my goal with this podcast series, is just to address some of the common misconceptions and preconceived notions out there. And hopefully that'll give people a little more of a foundation if they decide that they really do want to dive in and explore franchising. And in my consulting work, what I do is I give people a methodical approach to finding the right types of franchise businesses for them, and then teaching them how to go do the due diligence the right way so that they can make good, informed, educated decisions for themselves, as well as helping them connect all the other dots that need to happen: funding, legal, tax, accounting, all of these things. I've got a network of professionals and experts in areas that I'm not an expert that I can connect people with to help them piece this whole thing together. Because I find that so many people, while they love the idea of business ownership, they never really do themselves justice by really exploring the different options that could be available to them, because it's overwhelming. You know, if you just look at franchising, which is certainly not the only way that someone can get into business for themselves, right? But if you just take franchising, there's thousands of franchises out there, and it can be overwhelming just trying to figure out, okay, which ones should I be looking at? And that leads me into the topic that I want to discuss on the first episode of this misconception series, which is the misconception that all franchises are created equally. And this could not be further from the truth. At any given time, there's roughly 4,000 active franchise businesses across the US. By active, all I mean is they are offering franchise opportunities to people that are looking to get into business for themselves. All right. And then there's a very vast landscape of different types of franchise businesses within those roughly 4,000 different franchises. Usually about half of those, somewhere around 2,000, are going to be in the food and beverage sector. So that's another misconception. I talk about this all the time. If you listen to the podcast, franchising is so much more than just food businesses. McDonald's. Let's make that very clear, although that's not the topic of today's video. So, you know, you've got another roughly 2,000 franchise businesses out there that have nothing to do with the food and beverage industry. So we can think of those as non-food franchises. All right. But a lot of people, I think, assume if they see that a franchise or that a company is franchising their business, that somehow legitimizes that company. And just because they're a franchise, then it's as good of an opportunity as the next franchise. And so, you know, a lot of what I do in you know, my consulting work, and a lot of how I can help the people that I work with, is by vetting these franchises, because believe me, they are not all created equally, right? That's kind of like saying all food is created equally, right? And I think we all know that, look, if you go to Ruth's Chris and order a prime rib, you're getting something very different than if you go to McDonald's and order a cheeseburger. Nothing against either of those, but two very different outcomes, even though they're both food. So this is something that people need to really put some time and energy into understanding. Okay, if I want to get into business for myself, if I want to do that through a franchise, what should I be looking for in the franchisor? All right, we're not talking about specific industry or the type of business yet. Just what are we looking for in the franchisor? So a little bit of behind the scenes of how I'm able to help my coaching clients when it comes to looking at legitimate franchisors that are the real deal, right? That are top tier franchises with a proven track record, with great leadership teams that are well capitalized, that have, actual systems and processes and good support systems in place to help their franchisees, because a lot of franchisors are lacking in one, if not multiple of those areas that I just mentioned. So I'm part of a network of franchise consultants called Fran Choice, and Fran Choice has been around for about 25 years. All right, and at Fran Choice, all of us as consultants, we are all independent consultants. So we do not work for Fran Choice. We did not pay money to become a part of Fran Choice. There are franchise consulting groups out there that are actually franchises themselves. So someone with no prior franchise experience or even prior business ownership experience can go and pay a franchise fee to become a franchise consultant to then help other people buy franchises. It gets pretty freaking convoluted.
I'm confused as hell.
FranChoice is made up of consultants like myself that all have a deep background in franchising. Most of us currently own or have owned franchise businesses ourselves, and many of us have also worked on the franchisor side as well. So we bring all of that real life experience to the table. And a lot of that experience that we're able to leverage is in vetting brands that we're comfortable working with. So FranChoice as an organization has been around for about 25 years now. And at this point, they've developed a very solid reputation in the franchise world. So they get a huge volume of requests from franchisors. Many of them are emerging brands that are, just kind of coming onto the scene in the last few years and are really looking to grow their number of franchisees. And then some are more established brands that, for whatever reason, they need some assistance in adding more franchisees to their system. Regardless, FranChoice gets a lot of inquiries, a lot of brands that want to, work with us and be able to plug in with our consulting network, because they know that we're all experts in franchising, and we give really good advice and coaching to the people that we work with that are looking to potentially invest in franchise businesses for themselves. So that gives FranChoice and all of us consultants that are part of FranChoice the luxury of being very, very selective about the brands that we choose to work with. And so not only does a brand have to make it through FranChoice's vetting process, and FranChoice has a corporate office, and there's an individual that is solely responsible for managing franchisor relationships. So there's a very meticulous vetting process at the FranChoice corporate office level. But then for us as consultants, I think right now there's about 70 or so of us FranChoice consultants out there. We're not obligated to work with any of the brands in we call it our inventory, right? Or our portfolio of brands. There's no obligation, right? I'm not obligated to recommend a certain brand just because they're now part of the FranChoice inventory. it's completely up to us as consultants. We have complete autonomy in terms of which brands we are comfortable recommending. And so that's another layer of vetting, right? Because as consultants, we all have our own kind of criteria that we're really looking for in brands that we're going to be comfortable recommending to people. So that essentially means that for anyone working with myself or another franchise consultant, you can feel very, very confident that if we are recommending a brand to you, it has been through so much vetting, right? It doesn't mean it's perfect. I want to clarify this, right? The perfect franchise doesn't exist. So if that's what you're searching for, if that's what you're waiting for to finally pull the trigger and invest in a franchise, buckle up, because you're you're going to be on that search for a while. I think
that ain't going to happen.
The perfect franchise doesn't exist. All these businesses have challenges, right? None of these franchisors are perfect or have it all figured out. They're all continuing to learn and evolve and get better. And, they have a variety of different types of franchisees, and, all of these businesses are going to have their fair share of obstacles. If it was easy or painless or, guaranteed results, everyone would be a franchise owner or a business owner in general. So I don't want to make it sound like that, but you can rest assured if myself or any other franchise consultant is recommending a brand to you, it's a brand that's, made it through the franchise vetting process. And then it's also a brand that individual consultant has really done some research into and gotten to know the people behind the brand, and they feel confident recommending it to you. We'll get right back to the episode in just a minute, but if you've been considering business ownership, if you're already a business owner looking to expand and you're curious about franchising, I'd love to connect with you, answer any initial questions that you have, talk about a specific franchise, and detail the exact process that I use and have taken hundreds of people through to help them understand franchise ownership, find the right franchise for them, and conduct the necessary due diligence. Click the link in the show notes if you'd like to schedule a free, no obligation strategy call. I look forward to talking with you. And now back to the episode. So I'll pull the curtain back a little bit further on my process, because this kind of topic came to mind as I'm working with an individual, and I recommended 3 different brands as kind of initial recommendations to them, which is kind of my standard process. We do a lot of upfront work together to really get clear on, I call it the framework, right? What are the key things you're looking to accomplish through owning your own business? What do you really envision your role as the business owner being? How do you want to spend your time as a business owner? How much time do you have to put into it? What other responsibilities are you going to have that you need to maintain while you're starting this business? We go through this whole process to develop this framework for what the ideal franchise business would look like. And that framework is more characteristics of the business, not necessarily what industry, what products or services is the business selling. So I recommend 3 brands, which is my typical starting point, right? We can always introduce other options, but it's really key for anyone to have a good starting point so that they can start building a foundation, right? So when I recommend 3 brands, my ask of anyone is, hey, trust the work that I've put in and why I'm making these recommendations. I'm not pulling them out of my ass. I'm recommending them with a lot of thought and intention behind them. So let's go learn a little bit more about these brands, and then we debrief and we strategize and we build on what you're learning. We build on what you're learning that you like. We build on what you're learning that you don't like. And then we're able to eliminate options, discuss why that option's not a good fit for you. So your feedback to me is then very instrumental in helping me replace any brands that we eliminate with other brands that are going to have more of what you've learned that you really, really like and want in a franchise business. So it's an iterative process in many cases, and we're really able to dial it in, but you have to really actually start having some conversations with these brands, because that's where the real learning happens, right? You're going to only be able to do very surface level research if you're just, using the internet to do your research. You're not going to get a whole lot of the real meat and potatoes of the information that you're going to want when evaluating a franchise. So anyways, I bring my 3 recommendations, and this guy goes out and starts doing his own research, which is fine. I would never discourage that, but then he comes back with a brand that's almost identical to one of the brands that I recommended, but I've never heard of this brand, which doesn't inherently mean it's not a good brand. But, after doing some research, this brand, in my opinion, was very, very wobbly. And so in talking to this guy, and I took the time to better explain to him, what I'm sharing with you now about um, this vetting process that any of the brands that we work with at FranChoice goes through, and then my own personal vetting process for me to get comfortable recommending a brand that's part of our inventory. And I realized in talking with him, he just kind of had this assumption or this misconception that, oh, it's a franchise, and this other company that Wes recommended to me is a franchise. Therefore, they must be essentially equal in all things because they are both franchises. And so, I didn't tell him to, shut down his research on this other franchise. I said, look, if you want to look into it, that's fine. It's not my place to tell you not to. But here's the things I'd really encourage you to look at, because these are the things I'm looking at in any brand that I'm comfortable recommending to someone else. And these are some of the key areas that distinguish the best franchises out there from the rest of the pack, and the franchises that I would not be comfortable recommending to someone else. The first thing I look at is the tenure or experience of the brand, right? This is one of the most challenging parts of finding a good franchise business is territory availability, right? Because the big established prominent brands out there, they're prominent because they have a big footprint, right? They have locations or franchisees all over the place. That's how they become a nationally recognized brand. So if the brand's already that prominent, it becomes very, very difficult to then still be able to find good, viable territory available, especially if you're in, a larger market, or, even a second or third tier market, once some of these brands really, really become established. So then it kind of becomes this balancing act, right? Where, you have a lot of emerging franchises coming onto the scene all the time. One of the things that attract people to these emerging brands is wide open territory or prime territories still available, right? But then there's the inherent risk, or at least what most perceive as inherent risk, of getting involved as an early adopter with an emerging brand, right? You don't have as much of a track record. You don't have as much data, in terms of what other franchisees have been able to do in their business. You just don't have as much diligence that you can do on that. So that's the first thing I look at, is how long has the brand been around? And if they have been around for a while, what kind of a track record and reputation do they have? All right. I do not eliminate a brand from consideration for my own purposes just because they're not an established brand. In fact, probably half the brands that I work with and work pretty closely with and feel very confident recommending to others are more in the emerging category. Right? I think the technical definition of an emerging franchise brand is less than 100 units or 100 licenses awarded. Okay, so I work with a lot of brands that technically fall into that emerging brand category. So if it's an emerging brand, I'm looking at the leadership, right? What's their background and what's their experience? And a lot of what I'm looking for is, does anyone on the leadership team have prior franchise experience if this is a new emerging franchise concept? Because what happens a lot of times in franchising, you see many, many examples of this, is, founder starts a business, decides to franchise it, builds it to, 100, 200, 300 franchisees. And then a larger company, or, what we've seen over the last 6 or 7 years is a lot of interest in private equity coming in and acquiring growing franchise brands. So you end up with all these founders that kind of get displaced because they got bought out of their business or they exited their business, and they take everything they learned in building that first franchise brand and they go do it again. And then you have all these I call them parent companies, right? um, that essentially roll up multiple franchise brands and operate them under one large umbrella, a parent company of brands. And usually what you see is these brands are similar in some way, right? So like the franchise businesses my wife and I have owned have all been in the home service, home improvement categories, right? And so one of our brands was acquired by a company called Neighborly. They own 20 something different franchise brands in the home service space, right? I work with a company called Exponential Fitness that owns, I think, 10 different brands in the boutique fitness and recovery space right now. So you see a lot of that, right? So if you start to understand some of these dynamics at play and some of what to look for, look, the emerging brand that's backed by a multi-billion-dollar parent company that has built 9 other successful franchise brands, that's a very, very different risk profile to be an early adopter in one of their brands than the emerging brand that has a founder, that's been building their own business for the last 6, 7, 8 years, and now they've decided to franchise it, and they're figuring out this franchise thing as they go. Like, on paper, if you just glance at them, you see 2 emerging brands that don't have much track record, don't have a lot of franchisees. But when you start to peel the layers back a little bit, you can really start to see there's some pretty distinct differences between those 2 options. So I'm looking at those. A lot of other emerging brands, they partner with what you'll hear referred to as FSOs, or franchise support organizations. So these are franchise development firms that will partner with emerging brands. A lot of times there's an equity position that these development firms are taking in the brand, which is a good thing. You want to see that equity position because that means they have a vested interest in the long-term success of that brand. They're not just a sales organization that's brought in to help a franchise sell a bunch of units really quickly, but they have zero interest or zero skin in the game as to whether or not they're selling a bunch of units the right way for a franchise, or is the franchise well positioned to actually support and get those franchises open that they're helping them sell. So I typically want to see that the support company, the development firm that a young brand is partnering with, has an equity position because there's good long-term alignment. So those are the things I'm looking at to get comfortable presenting or recommending emerging brands to someone. So another here's a misconception, a little bonus misconception for you. Don't just assume that because it's a newer franchise, only been franchising for the last 1, 2, 3 years, that it's automatically that much riskier, right? And there are a lot of benefits to getting in early with a brand. Prime territory availability being a big part of them, but also just a much higher ceiling, right? The chance to really build a big business. Go look up some of the early adopters for Orange Theory, and some of these types of brands out there that are now legacy brands that everyone knows and recognizes as great business opportunities. Some of the people that got in early on those, they've been able to build life changing wealth because they were early adopters. So there's a lot to like about getting in with the right types of emerging brands. Other things I'm looking at, regardless of tenure of the brand, how well capitalized is the franchisor? Guys, this is so important. And we've seen examples of this recently where brands that had a great concept, they sold a lot of franchises really, really fast, and they got out over their skis and they did not have the capital to support the the growth that they had. I think what a lot of people don't understand, especially going back to some of the things I mentioned about, how a brand is structured and who they're partnered with to help them sell franchises, the franchisor is not getting rich off of the initial franchise fees that people are paying up front to become franchisees, right? The franchisor's primary business model is the royalty stream, right? The royalty being a small percentage of the franchisee's gross revenue that's coming back to the franchisor. That's how they make money. That's their primary revenue stream, and what's ultimately going to determine if that franchise organization is successful or not. And that takes years usually for the royalty revenue to really pick up and stabilize to the point where the franchisor has good, predictable cash flow coming in. And the best franchisors out there, they anticipate the support needs that they're going to have um, as they're growing and adding more franchisees, and they stay ahead of that instead of trying to play catch up. So the point is, it's expensive, very expensive to franchise your business. And just because you started selling some franchises doesn't mean that you've made it as a franchisor. I forget the exact numbers, and I'm sure there's multiple versions of this statistic floating around out there, but it's something like 5%, 3%, 6%, something less than 10% of franchisors make it to 100 units or more, which is staggering, guys. So do not assume that just because it's a franchise, it's legitimate or it's created equally to any of these other franchises out there. And yes, I do work with brands that are not at 100 units yet, but they have, in my opinion and in the opinion of many other experts at FranChoice, they have the right formula in place to get to 100 units and well beyond and be a long-term viable franchise. But you got to do your own due diligence too. So I'm looking at how well is the brand capitalized. I'm looking at the leadership team. You want to look at any data that they do have in terms of franchisee performance. We try to really get a sense of franchisee satisfaction as well. I tell everyone that I work with, the biggest part of the due diligence you're ever going to do on a franchise is what we call validation, right? It's talking to other franchise owners and learning from their experience. And you're going to be able to tell very quickly in a conversation with a franchise owner, if they're satisfied or not with the support that they're getting from the franchisor. And I'll preface all that, or the caveat to that is you also never find a franchisee that's like 100% satisfied with their franchisor, and they shouldn't be, right? Because there should always kind of be this healthy tension between the franchisor and the franchisee. They should be pushing each other, to keep growing and to keep getting better. So don't expect that you're going to hear, franchisees say, "Oh yeah, my franchisor is perfect. There's nothing that they could do better." You're probably not going to hear that, but you're going to be able to tell, if they're overall satisfied with the franchisor, with the business, with what they're getting out of the business. Ultimately, are they happy with the decision that they made? So we try to really get a good sense of that too before we start working with a brand, and for me, before I start recommending the brand. So there's a lot that goes into just a brand getting onto my desk and me saying, okay, this is a brand that I'm comfortable recommending. And then there's the whole other topic of, okay, who would I be comfortable recommending this brand to? Just because I'm comfortable recommending it doesn't mean I'm going to be comfortable recommending it to everyone or to just anyone. Right. I learned a long time ago when I was selling franchises that there is not a one size fits all approach to finding the right franchise for someone. Right. The right franchise for me is not necessarily going to be the right franchise for you. Okay. There's a lot that goes into this. And this is where the process that I take people through in this framework, that we work together to build is so important. Instead of just jumping straight to, oh, I want to buy this franchise because I love the service that they provide, or I love the product, or my area needs this and it would do well here. You've got to really look at all of these other variables, which we'll talk about in another podcast. But main point I wanted to get across here today is not all franchises are created equally. And, if you're working with myself or another consultant, and particularly if you're working with a consultant from the Fran Choice group, you can rest assured that if we're recommending a brand to you, there's a lot of research and diligence that's gone into that brand. We can't get it right 100% of the time, right? Even within the FranChoice inventory, not all of those brands are created equally, right? But you can at least know that they've met certain criteria that we look for, and we turn away a lot more brands than we actually bring in on an annual basis. So hope this helps. If you have questions or want to chat more about franchise ownership, click the link to my calendar below, schedule some time for us. And as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And thank you so much for being here. We'll see you next time.